I think, a constitutive contradiction of politics and theory. And in that sense, the thing that perhaps I most liked about this paper was the moment in which you identify that euphemism and silver linings are the counterparts of defeat, and are together there, and that those two things are a condition of the defeated intellectual, right? And that defeat of the intellectual perhaps would be, in a certain case, the giving in to the academic or injunction that I also want to resist, but also in the political situation, it would be there. So
no, very briefly. I mean, part of what I hear you saying is similar to something that Susan brought up in a way, right? And you know, any of us who are committed, for what it's worth, to sort of like think with the intellectual resources of critical reason, of critical theory, but at the same time engage with actual historical processes, right? There is always that constitutive tension between the pull to abstraction, but then also the paying attention to the concrete. And maybe it's an impossible project, but it's one that I'm not willing to give up. I mean, Adorno, I remember, said once, like, the point is not to philosophize about concrete things, but out of them. And I think that if we get it right, we are closer to that. And that's, even if I don't always get it right, that's what I'm shooting for. I mean, that's the goal, that's the benchmark, right? To sort of like have concepts, of course, and conceptual thinking, which is abstraction, but in the closest proximity to the actual historical objects, the processes, and the situations that one is trying to reconstruct. I mean, that's how I understand political theory, to put it very bluntly. I mean, for me, any thinker is responding to a situation, and you have to reconstruct the situation to understand fully what is it that body of work, the limits, but also you can even make sense of some of the tensions that otherwise you would characterize in a very Derridian way as aporias. Now, there might be contradictions that could be made intelligible if you reconstruct the political situation that she or he was responding to. And that's my way here. I mean, and that's how I read. That's what informs how we do these things. Anyway,
Just a small point and then a bigger one. The small one, when Francisco was just talking, it occurred to me that back to that James thing about the tragedy moment. It's also kind of a very Machiavellian moment that he's not being true to, which is that he's saying that one Toussaint is seeing things from the perspective from on high, is seeing it, from on low, and then, to bring it back to your realism, Machiavelli said you have to see things from both ends and never stop going back and forth. So, it could be a moment again where James is not really being true to the spirit, in which it's a failure on James's part, in other words, in his assessment. But that's the small part. The big, I did feel like the first half of the paper, I was sort of, I get that the sort of Lockean pluralization of the Enlightenment, and Scott, like, you think there are these conservative moves in both. I think you need to do something more conceptually, though, to say what brings these together besides the fact that you think that they're conservative. And I did feel like there were hints in it, pluralization on the one hand and paradox on the other hand. What you, I think is drained out of that is they become very inert that way. It's this sort of pluralization. These things exist alongside each other. And in paradox, a statement, a proposition and its negation just exists. Whereas for you, contradiction is something that's more productive. And so I think what you object to in both of these things is the sort of loss of the productivity of ideas. The moment where the idea jumps off the text and becomes a productive force in politics. And pluralization and paradox both divest the Enlightenment of its productivity. And I think that may be one thing. The other thing that I think you object to is both of these moves really separate the past from the present, and kind of make it although they smuggle in a kind of presentism at the same time, but they render the past inert. And it seems like, again, what you're interested in always is the productivity, the generativity, and what you object to is that they really cut those things off at the knees. Like that's what they're doing, and that's you know. And I think you need to kind of bring some of that out, because otherwise it just reads like these are people I don't like, and you know there's a reason you don't like them.
Yeah.
And you need to kind of bring that out, I think, a little bit more.
No, yeah. That's a very good point, and I think that you actually identify the moments where I hint at that, and in my head, you know, there is a clear connection between the two. It's precisely because these are deeply dehistoricized in their gestures, but their present is in a very different way. Everything that you said, I completely agree with, and that's something that has to be reworked. I mean, because I want that discussion, which right now literally reads in the way that I have basically worked it out. So without obviously putting myself in the same position, because it would be a foolish thing to do, but it's kind of like the difference between the method of presentation and the method of inquiry. Like right now, this is the inquiry. I mean, this is how I've been kind of like working through my way through these guys, and that's why you find seeds of the argument. But definitely for the final, for even the next iteration of this, I need to put it together. And when I do, at least the way that I'm thinking about it, that's exactly what you picked up is exactly, that will be the entry point into drawing out what is it that these approaches have in common, but more importantly, what is it that is problematic and why, you know, this more robust sense of the situation, contradictions, so on and so forth, is more generative. Because that's for me, and I think I like the way that you put it, looking at these processes from the perspective of how even James himself sort of like saw Trotsky's History of the Revolution, which was one of his inspirations of the Russian Revolution, right? I mean, the whole point of this, you have to be scholarly and sound, but it's really to sort of like think of ideas as jumping off, as alive, as generative, and to sort of like reunite the present by sort of like looking at that as a received tradition. Maybe that's the other Orwellian moment. And in that sense, it's not something that you so easily sever, which is the other thing that they both have in common. I mean, even though they're fundamentally different, for Scott it's about problem spaces, and we're no longer there, so we can now see it from a distance. For Pocock, it's like, well, the Enlightenment is over, we know what it was, so now we're just gonna sort of like look at different variations of it, as if the process stopped. And it's that severance of the present from the past, the other element that I would definitely bring to the forefront there. But thank you, yeah.
Just a quick question. Ideas are not concepts.
Yeah.
Right. And
yes.
This is because for me these are problematic terms, and I don't want a definition because they're not definable.
Yeah.
That's not the answer, right?
Yeah.
But if I put ideas,
yeah.
concepts, both of which you've discussed quite a
sure.
bit now, and then this other one that's such a toughie, which is called history.
Yeah.
I mean, do those words bother you?
Oh, they bother me. I mean, I use them, especially the first two, I use them interchangeably in the context of discussions, but I am very uneasy about them. I mean, even forget. I mean, I won't even add another one that troubles me immensely, which is words, ideas, concepts.
Yeah.
I mean, because in a way, it's really hard to think through, and it's a problem. And I think that a lot of it can. I mean, if I were to work it out, which I don't know if I can or will, but if I were to meet it head on, I think that then it really comes down to kind of distinction between the linguistic and the conceptual, if we can even make such a distinction, right? But definitely concepts have a more specific, in my mind, set of determinations than just an idea. But then again, I mean, sometimes it can be used interchangeably. And that's what I struggle with, that tension, because part of my commitment, I mean, I was educated from very early on in this kind of, you know, by Hegelians on the labor of the concept. So I'm very much concerned with conceptual thinking, how concepts acquire or lose the determinations. But then I also know that, you know, that the two terms are not interchangeable. So sometimes you want to treat an idea, but then even the question perhaps will be, when that idea gets formulated in conceptual terms, right? What is the transition, so on and so forth. I mean, they bother me too. Let's put it that way, they bother me, and I don't have a way to solve it, but I think that I try to keep it in the back of my mind all the time as I'm writing, as I'm thinking, even if when I'm teaching or when I'm engaged in this kind of like productive conversation, I might jump from one to the other freely, but when I'm definitely writing, I try to sort of like keep track of my use of each, because part of me, as you said, and the thing is that there is no way to define this. Actually, from a critical theory perspective, it would be self-defeating to sort of like give a propositional definition of what a concept is, what an idea is. So it's almost like intuitive to a degree, which makes it murky and difficult. He had a hand up for a while, so just, yeah. Yeah, you.
Corey actually sort of covered.
Oh, Corey, okay, great. Hi.
Well, first of all, thank you. And I guess my question is broad and possibly unhelpful, but I'm interested in terms of the way you're grappling with James's theorization of the colonial situation.
Yeah.
As you cite him in passing and not favorably in the paper, but and you've mentioned him here, so I'm assuming you're resisting George Chickarello Meyer's
Yes.
rendering.
Yep.
And specifically, I was wondering about his theorization of the colonial situation as a locus in which dialectical motion is arrested. I'm assuming that's totally out the window. I don't know if that assumption is warranted. So I guess I'd be interested in hearing more about how specifically, and I guess to what extent specifically, you're looking at recognizing the dialectical motion within the colonial project.
Yep.
And to what degree this is a heuristic exercise, or not heuristic, hermeneutic exercise. To what degree are you teasing out sort of what seems to be the theorization in James, and to what degree are you imputing your own?
Yeah, I understand, yeah. Few things. Colonial situation, I mean, is a fair question to ask, because in a way, I think that I mentioned in one of the footnotes another paper that I have, which I gave close to a year ago at the Constellations Conference, which I deal with that more directly. So now, the concept of the colonial situation that I'm trying to work with is the one initially formulated by the French anthropologist Georges Valandier, right? And I find that to be extremely productive, and in a way that goes in a very different direction from Chickarello's work and many others, because what I find productive in Valandier is that he historically accounts for contradictions, right? Colonialism inaugurates a new situation, but that is a situation that it is futile to see in these moralistic binaries of, then the colonized and the colonized. In a colonial situation, there are collaborators. In a colonial situation, there are structural beneficiaries, both native and non-native, right? A colonial situation is a situation of negotiation. I mean, something that you learn from, it's kind of amazing how in the historiography that we were told as kids, Cortez and his guys emerged as these heroic figures, and the only way that we're able to subdue so many empires is because there were so many people that hated those empires. And this is the phenomenon that some ethnohistorians refer to as Indian conquistadors, right? Many tribes that were raided and predated by the Incas, the Mayans, and the Aztecs, they saw the colonial powers, so sure, we're not going to make an alliance with you. And they went to war and fought some of these empires, which are idealized, by the way, in many of these decolonial things, as if the Incas and the Mayans were not ruthless empires, right? But because they are native, somehow they're not as bad, or so it seems, right? So it complicates all of that. So rather than arresting that, for me, the properly dialectical formulation, because it allows you to sort of like see appropriations, reappropriations, that kind of conflict that Corey was alluding to, that productivity that emerges, that in which then it no longer makes any sense, especially when you have social formations that are older than this country. I mean, going back to where we're from, 500 years of history. I mean, does it still make any sense to sort of have that binary between what was externally imposed and what is native? I mean, it really is it's just not a very productive intellectual or politically speaking way of thinking. So that's how I understand the colonial situation. It comes out of the anthropological discourse of Balandier, and is informed by that. Now, part of my penchant for that term, of course, is that, as I alluded to, and this is an argument that I make in my book, I defend from this critical theory perspective the primacy of the situation as constitutive of how we think about political theorizing, right? So for me, I give primacy to that, which doesn't mean that I neglect the agency involved, so on and so forth, but rather that the situation presents certain constraints, but also possibilities. There are openings, there are cracks, but there are also, what's the word that I'm looking for, obduracies and blockages that are situational and need to be reconstructed and thought through in a very concrete way. So that's the reason why I'm not sympathetic to the jump-starting of the dialectic of Chicago, who is a friend, and I'm very critical of the modalism that informs, not his thinking actually, here he's an exception and he's a good one, but the modalism of the Dussels and some of the other disciples of the decolonial thing, in which, I mean, Dussel even had the nerve, and I'm going to say it flat out, the nerve to write that there was some kind of Inca equivalent of the categorical imperative in which all the tribes were cosmologically united. Yeah, except that the tribes didn't get the memo of the cosmological unity. They had to pay tribute. These were tributary exploitative systems. So when you have that kind of like binary or a kind of neonativism, that's what I think that the concept of the colonial situation militates against, and it's a far more productive way. Now, for me, this is not merely a hermeneutical exercise or an interpretative exercise. There is something to be said about that, and I try to do it well, and it's something that I have learned today, among many other things, is that there is too much of a proprietary impulse on my part with James, and that's something that I'm happy to correct. Because I am not trying to sort of like assimilate James into my own thinking. And the reason that that is there, because it's there, otherwise it wouldn't have been brought up, is that I have been reading Black Jacobins for a very long time and teaching it. Then I remember the Davis Good book came out and I paid no attention to it. And then suddenly everybody was writing about James through those lenses. And I'm not the only one. There are many other historians, people that some we know who will agree with me here. And then so in a way, the way that this is written right now is trying to show how it is fundamentally different from what Scott makes him out to be. And in the process of doing so, I might have slipped here and there. The case of the tragic, as Corey pointed out, you might have something else in mind, in which suddenly I might come across as enlisting James into my own little tradition and my own thing. And if that is the case, then I need to revisit that, because I'm not interested in doing that sort of thing. I mean, I do think that he belongs to a particular intellectual tradition, and a lot of what he says is made more intelligible in terms of that tradition. And that's what I try to do in the last chapter of my book, A Tradition of Political Ethics, right, that has this moment of realism and utopia. But otherwise I'll be violating, I will be making him into a particularity of something else, and that's exactly what I don't want to do. So I want to make sure then, and I'm very grateful for even raising the question, that I carefully identify those points of distance between James and the outlook that I'm defending, and that I can make those more productive as part of a reading. Because honestly, for me, what is at stake is to reclaim the tradition that he belongs to reclaim that kind of thinking, and to show how, in the context of the project, there is a better way, a more critical way, actually, forget about better for now, a more critical way of understanding colonialism, of understanding contradiction, and ultimately even the intersection between what critical theory might have to offer to some of these discussions, which is increasingly seen in a very one-way street. And my goal has always been from the very beginning, well, this is a two-way street. So let's see what, okay, sure, post-colonialism, decolonial can interrogate this, perfect. But let's see what the thought forms that they have inherited, what from a critical theory perspective we can say about that. So that's more what I'm into, rather than just having a better reading of, or better interpretation of James, which I hope I have, but you know, that's not the main goal. Does that make sense? Yeah.
will maybe build on some earlier comments then, but maybe this is also just because it's a workshop and I don't, maybe you're looking for concrete suggestions for organizing the paper. But maybe one way to distinguish your position from Scott's would be, so one idea would be like, so a notion of tragedy that depends on paradox versus a notion of tragedy that depends on contradiction. But the other difference, of course, is that Scott is talking about tragedy as a mode of implantment. So there are historical events that happen, and then we as historians choose our forms of implantment, and necessity appears or does not appear depending on form of implantment. It's Hayden White, he's citing Hayden White, but the way that you talk, I think you want to talk about tragedy, it's not, we're not talking about one among many forms of implantment we may choose. There are actual tragedies in history and real forms of constraint, and it's not like I selected tragedy as a form of implantment. It's like they will kill us. And that's to me, that's another way of maybe distinguishing why you think Scott's reading of why James's revision is a form of tragedy is not getting at what maybe James actually cares about.
Okay, no, that's a wonderful suggestion, thank you. No, I mean, and as I said, I mean, I usually don't, I work these things on my own, and the whole point, I never present in this kind of setting work that I think, for what it's worth, that I'm already wedded to a particular interpretation. It's not productive, because then it becomes me sort of like telling you how you got it wrong. I rather present, and this is why this is very helpful, things that I'm still working through, precisely because I want to find better ways of formulating it. At some point I thought of maybe eliminating the discuss section. I thought maybe I can just summarize this to a full note or something like that. It's not worth it. But then I'm being told that, that I need to keep it. So, I mean, I'm still basically trying to figure out, I have a strong sense of what my entry point into this is. And I have a strong sense of what my disagreements are with others. But as I said at the beginning, I don't want to make this project just a polemic against this or that crowd, but rather show what is this other way in which it can be more productively done. And that's the hardest part, but also the most rewarding one. And this has been extremely helpful to do that, so thank you.
Great. So on that note, thank you very much.